further.
I'm bringing over your tea.
Oh, yes, okay. We can share the stool for tea.
That's right.
There you go. And now I'm going to move Fred's out of the way. I'm taking both of your strollers away.
Okay. So then we want,
I wanted to ask you before I forget,
Sure.
can you tell me where, I forgot, where around or in the building there are any ramps?
Oh.
Fred,
That's a
You
sore one.
too.
That's a sore one.
that's a loaded question. There are no ramps at 30 Cleary in Ottawa. There is a lift instead of an elevator, and that is enough to technically make the space accessible. It may be technically accessible, but it is not a practically accessible space.
Wait, check.
Did you hear the story about
right here then.
the sanctuary?
Tell me, I may have, but
Do
the
you
way
need a
you're
cleaner?
No, I'm
mentioning
good,
it, I
thanks.
think perhaps not.
We had there is a restaurateur in Ottawa, and he's excellent. He's from Bangladesh.
This is Mr. Mia?
No?
Oh,
Well, he's Mr. Mia got involved first, and
Okay.
then Salim, the restaurateur,
Okay.
is the one who told me about Mr. Mia. That Mr. Mia came over to be a servant in a home of the Deputy High Commissioner of Bangladesh, who I guess was just a kind of a cruel person, and he had, for instance, Mr. Mia finally had to sue him to get his $30,000 in back salary. I mean, he was that kind of a guy. And when the slapping around started, Mr. Mia kind of knew Salim because Salim used to get invited over there often. And so he took Salim aside and said, I don't know what to do. They're keeping my money, they're keeping my passport, and they were sending some to his family in Bangladesh. And so if Mr. Mia leaves, or if he doesn't have his passport, and if he leaves his job, then he doesn't have a legal reason to stay in Canada. And so I talked to Brian Cockney. Did you ever meet Brian?
I never did.
Uh-huh.
I never did. By
He
the
was a
time
real gem.
I arrived, his dementia was far enough along that it didn't happen. Sadly, but please continue. I don't.
Yeah. Oh, he was a very smart guy, and so I went to talk to him. And one thing was that whatever we did, we had to do it quickly before immigration would grab him.
Yeah.
And so I talked to Brian, and I was going to say we laughed for a couple hours, but that was only after there was the beginning. We had to do something, so we're talking about we didn't want to. We didn't have a chance really to talk it over with the board.
Right.
And he just said, "Well, let's just do it, friend." And so he bore the brunt of that decision, and he felt finally he had a shower built in the basement, which is something he wanted for a long time. And that's in on the door in the men's room. No, it's not in the basement, it's on the first floor, the main floor. And then the door that says janitor, you go in there, that's where the shower is.
Okay.
Took me a long time to find that.
And I think Brian said he's been wanting a shower for
Yeah,
a long
Yeah.
time. That if he went for a bike ride or something.
Yeah.
So he was really happy. I said,
but the congregation was so solid behind that whole thing, right through. And they had a wonderful committee, had a lot of different types of skills on the committee. And one skill they had, of course, being Unitarians, was they knew how to publicize stuff. So we got a lot of stuff in the paper. And then we finally, I think we had, I wasn't on the negotiating anything part of the committee. And our committee started negotiating with immigration people, and things weren't moving on getting him permanent status. And so I decided, I'm retired, how old was I? 70?
I don't know.
73. And I'm just sitting here at home, nothing to do. Why don't I go in with Mr. Meter? And they had a great publicity people on the committee, so when I walked through with my little carry-on through the front doors of the church, I think there were 4 radio stations, 3 newspapers. Are there 4 television? Anyhow, well, finishing up on the sanctuary, I guess.
Yes.
I went in just to try to get some
That's
attention because it was all the immigration people were fine. I let them stay there, and
Well, that very first night, the people who were closely involved, we all stayed overnight. Because Brian thought if immigration is going to come in, they'll probably do it that first night. So we all slept on the floor of the sanctuary.
Oh,
And that was one of our wedding anniversaries, I remember. I don't know which one. It was interesting to me that we spent our
yeah.
anniversary sleeping on the church floor.
And of course, we knew everybody there,
Sure.
Yeah.
even though I was minister of the other congregation. And every time I was Brian's guest to speak, I reminded the congregation that they promised the people living on the East End that they would help them with their building because we helped fund a little bit, you know. So,
Well, the
so
members,
I used to say that every time I preached, and they came through $200,000 for us.
That's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
I've never earned that much preaching on a Sunday.
It wasn't for me, but it was enough to. The congregation itself, the fellowship, from the beginning, it saved up its own 200,000. So then we had 400,000 to purchase a building. And we were the purchaser. We provided the mortgage. We paid the mortgage on quite a large
But maybe
store.
Eric's been there and visited.
Hmm?
Maybe Eric and Ann have been there to visit.
Have you seen
Not
the?
yet. And
Not
that
yet.
is something, I've met several members of the fellowship.
Uh-huh.
We marched in the Pride Parade together last summer. I
Okay.
have yet to see the building and need to remedy that as soon as I can.
Yeah.
400 MacArthur. It's an interesting concept because the building is run by Heartwood House, which is an umbrella group for some 17 separate charities. So they all have a room there. And we paid the mortgage, so Heartwood House, which includes these charities, is paying the rent
Okay.
or paying the mortgage
Sure. Smart model.
on the building. So each of the charities had whatever done that they needed by way of renovations, and we had what did we have done? Well, we had our sanctuary was put in, which, if I'm not mistaken, is about that much larger than Fellowship Hall. So they can have, I think they can seat maybe one or two people more than Fellowship Hall.
Okay.
Just so that the people too don't get just too proud of. Bonnie, for a number of years, was the authority in Canada for obtaining a baby from overseas to be adopted in Canada.
Okay.
And it was all around this way and that way, and she'd hear somebody. And of course, the first baby always came here, and then somebody would say, "Oh, I want a baby just like that," and she has a lot of friends, and so there were hundreds. Plane loads would come.
Wow.
And so she started up. The first organization was Families for Children. And that was pretty much based on bringing children over here from somewhere. And then after that, we kind of left that. There was a bit of a fuss on the board and different, so we thought we'd leave that one, which is still going, and start Childhaven and start from scratch with homes overseas. And it wouldn't be for adoption, there are very few adoptions, but more in-country care. So there are 4 homes. There's where's the newsletter, Bonnie? Why didn't you bring a newsletter?
But anyway,
Huh?
so you have the 4 homes in India, and 1 each in Bangladesh and Nepal. And we used to have a home in Tibet until the Chinese government shut down all the private children's homes and made several central government children's homes. But we still support children for education.
Marianne,
So you would travel at least once a year to go to
I was traveling 4 times a year.
to India or to Bangladesh and
Sure, all of them.
all of them. Okay.
Yeah. But
And so you still have 4.
well, no, we have 6.
You have 6 now. Oh.
7, and then we support various women's organizations in those countries as well.
Wow.
she has 4 homes in India, children's homes, and 1 each in Bangladesh, Nepal, Tibet, and where else?
But in Tibet now, it's not a home, but we're supporting
Yeah,
children for education.
yeah.
So these kids you can't adopt them.
No, because most all of them have someone.
Okay.
Yeah, they have a grandmother or one parent or people who are interested in keeping in contact. There are a few orphans, but not that many. And Childhaven is sort of run like a family, so they have very close ties.
That is really generous work. Wow.
Yeah, it's really very challenging, but very, very interesting.
I bet, yeah.
Yeah.
So now your children are helping to run?
Well, Manny, our oldest son, our firstborn son, not our oldest son, because William is the oldest, but he does a lot of the work. And during the pandemic, we couldn't go over, so we really relied on Zoom a lot, and email, and the phone, but mostly Zoom and emails.
Now,
Which we
can you
still
travel? Do you travel now
I haven't traveled since the pandemic.
since the pandemic, but you hope
Yeah.
to?
I would be very interested. I'll have to wait and see what my doctor says, and he's a member of the board, so.
You say you were becoming more Unitarian. How did that switch happen? How did you hear about Unitarians? Because we're a pretty small group. I mean, wait till
I read
Scott
about it.
was.
And I majored in Bible, and I looked, and there was another guy, Howard Box. Did you ever meet him?
I don't know Howard Box.
Okay. He was my roommate in Drew University, and we were both Methodists, and we read in Britannica or someplace like that about Unitarians, and we looked into it, and we looked it up, and we decided we were both Unitarians. And I stayed with the Methodists. Or did I? Yeah, when I graduated from college, I had 3 Methodist parishes
Okay, yeah.
over a period of 10 years until I kept making overtures to the Unitarians, and there was, at that time, there was the Midwestern Unitarian Conference or something. I don't know if I have the first word right. Anyhow, I went before a committee of 3 guys, and I was sailing along there, and then one of them asked me something that just stopped me cold and floored me. The question was, what are your strengths? I couldn't deal with that. I just went blah, 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 blah. And so there were 2 in favor and 2 against. And I said, well, I gave it my best shot, and the guy who was sponsoring me, the executive, Unitarian executive in that area, said, no, Fred, we'll invite one more person, so it's not a tie vote. And so I went back a month later, and the other 2 changed their minds, so it was a unanimous vote for me to become a Unitarian minister.
Well done.
Yeah.
And a month later, now it takes at least a year to get another appointment. Well done.
I think that shows something about Unitarians, that they can
Yeah, that these
change
guys changed their mind.
and be
Yeah.
open.